When we're talking about the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, I think there's a tendency to think of that as a list. The only reason now I think for keep maintaining that is that it makes it easier to discuss it. But the Eightfold Path, which includes the Four Noble Truths, doesn't really exist as separate things. Everything is interwoven. Part of the difficulty for me in talking about the Eightfold Path is every time I start talking about it, there's stuff that needs to be plugged in from the other end, and then it needs to plug into other parts. I think it's more effective to think of the Eightfold Path as a process. It's a tool for us to use. The Buddha talked about it as, if we're going to ford a flooding river, we need to build a raft, we need to be careful about building the raft. And then we build this, very carefully built raft. And we can use it to cross the river. And once we get to the other shore, we're certain that, we've crossed safely and we no longer need the raft and we can dispose of it. We don't need to keep carrying it around. It's a tool. Also, when he was talking about the raft, extending that a little bit further, when he was talking about ethics, he said ethics are really important. An ethical foundation is important, and trying to cross the river without, building a strong system of ethics is like trying to row or pull our raft while it's still tied to the dock. So ethics is an important part of the Eightfold Path. It's broken into 3 sections to make it easier to talk about it. Originally to remember, but to talk about. It's broken down into wisdom, ethics, and practice. Wisdom is broken into right thought and right view or right understanding. Ethics is broken into right speech, right action, right livelihood. And practice, which is, mental discipline, is broken into right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So the reason I start with right view or right understanding, and almost anyone you listen to is going to say, "Oh, this is a good place to start," or "That's a good place to start." For me, this one is a good place. Right view is necessary if we are going to establish an ethical basis for ourselves. Ethics aren't laws. There are how we see ourselves acting ethically, how we interact with other people, how we don't do harm. And in order to have a right view, a right thought, we need to develop it. We need to understand. I talked about that the last time we were saying. In this society, we have a tradition of people telling us what's right. We see that, in school, as a kid, you're told what's right. You go to school and they tell you what's right and what's wrong. Our government is trying to tell us what's right and what's wrong. And most religions are trying to tell us what's right and what's wrong. What the Dharma and the Eightfold Path demands is that we see for ourselves. We come to our own understanding, our own view. And we do that not by listening to someone else, but actually doing some investigation. I talked about my having, joined the military and gone to Vietnam to see, for myself what the truth was, and to do what my country said had to be done. I was politicized there by seeing the actuality, by seeing the truth of the thing. And we need to see the truth of everything in order to be able to form an ethical view. I don't think that we all have to go to war, but we can't depend on what we've been told. We can't depend on, what we hear, what other people have told us, what we read. We need to really look into it for ourselves, get to know. Now, there are three parts to wisdom and to right view also. There's what's called the mundane. Mundane view is that looking at everyday things. If we're looking at racism, a big issue right now, we can't just look at, like this one little part of it. We need to really get to understand it, and understand it in awareness. Get to know it. We talked about, that piece of paper, I think they held up a napkin, and just, seeing this snapshot of an issue right now. And there's so much more there. If we look at slavery, that we'll have to look back 2,500 years. That's to see that it existed, and has existed all through history. It still exists now. If we look at what we're taught about it, if we look into any of the Abrahamic religions, the Old Testament supports slavery. The Old Testament tells us, who we should buy our slaves from, how to treat them, that we can beat them as long as they don't die within a day or two, that we can pass them down as property to our children. It's not just talking about indentured servitude, it's talking about owning other people's property and supporting that. Just as a small example, seeing, like the basis of that, how that's been translated into our government here in this country. When slavery was first an issue in the United States, a number of people who supported slavery looked to the Bible and brought that forward as justification for slavery. We need to look for ourselves. We need to see, what the situation is, and to get to know it in awareness. Incorporate it. When S.N. Goenka started teaching Vipassana meditation, the way he taught was, first developing mindfulness of the breath, really, really learning to focus, learning concentration. And then using that focus and concentration to develop our awareness of suffering. And very, very gently, as far as, some things are concerned, he wants people, or wanted people, to just sit without moving for about 3 hours one time. And it becomes uncomfortable. But as we sit in awareness of that, we know that the mind wants to run away. We see that, but if we develop the resolve to stay and watch, a change happens. We learn it. We really learn it in our awareness. And that is great practice for being in awareness and developing our right view. And that's in the mundane. There is the superior form of right view, which I initially thought was, the mundane, which is the Four Noble Truths. And that, okay, yeah, I know what those are. But again, we need to sit with that and to incorporate that into our lives. The superior in the Four Noble Truths, we really sit with that and become aware of our suffering and see that desire to pull away from it and resist that. Spend the energy to sit with it, to stay with it. When we see clinging and resistance and hate and delusion arising, not resisting, but really bearing down and getting to know it is the basis for our seeing clearly. And seeing clearly the truth of the thing is the basis for our establishing an ethical base. If we're looking at right livelihood, which is part of ethics, right speech, right action, right livelihood. If we look at a job, is this a good job to have? How is it affecting other people? How is it affecting the environment? What's the history of the job? How am I affecting other people by doing this? Seeing clearly, having the right view and the right understanding, right action, rather than just reacting, acting out of wisdom that we have developed. Takes us along the path. What this eventually leads us to is a great way of living. And as we develop understanding, it naturally brings us to generosity and compassion and living through there. And will help us end identifying with ideas and dogma. Once we banish those and really understand in awareness, we can step away from identification with ideas. We can abandon the dogma that, tells us what is, and follow the path of wisdom. It eventually takes us to, nirvana. And what does nirvana mean? It means unbound. It means ending clinging. Clinging is distinguished in the Dhamma. I had some notes here that I wanted to. So what the path does is it points the way. The Eightfold Path. It isn't the path. It's a way for us to learn to release ourselves from the dogma of wrong view or understanding. The Buddha talked about, like, here I am, I'm pointing the way and you're looking at my finger. The Eightfold Path is pointing the way for us.